Hello everyone and welcome to an in-depth guide on Gill Giotto. In this video I'm going to go over my current deck list, plus a bunch of other options for the deck, why I chose what I chose for the deck, and then a gameplay guide on how to do any of the combos or interactions within the deck, notable matchups and annoying cards and how to deal with them, and how other decks should try and beat this deck. I do want to clarify my deck list is not the end-all be-all. Obviously, new cards are going to come out, the deck is going to change, and a lot of there's a lot of creativity, a lot of personalization that goes into deck building, a lot of different tech choices that are better in different metas. So play what you want to play, and I'm going to go over a bunch of other options for the deck as well. So this is not a deck profile strictly, this is a deck guide. So let's start things off. Gill Giotto at its core I would say is a tempo deck. It has tools to go faster and it has tools to play slower. So you can lean aggressive or you can lean control, but either way, even if you lean more aggressive, you're going to have tools to still play in the late game. If you lean more control, you're going to have tools to push in if there's an opening. So you can really match the opponent's tempo. If the opponent decides to play aggressively and push in, then you can react to that, and then on your follow-up, push in yourself, flip things on your side, and then when there's an opening, just outright kill them. Or if the opponent decides that they want to play slower, if the opponent's playing more of a control deck, then you can play slow with them. You can call Stone Pass, and just over time you're going to be picking away at their deck by removing cards with the extension rule. You already have them locked out of their graveyard as a resource in their removed area, and if the opponent doesn't do anything themselves proactively, you're going to get set up, your judgment set up, you're going to be decking them out eventually. You're just going to eventually reach a point where you out-resource them. As soon as they do try and push in, you can try and put a stop to that and then go in with your own push. But if they don't, then you'll just passively win from removing their entire deck from the game. So first things first, we have of course Gill Lapis and Giotto with their extension rule that lets them tag. And I am also opting to play the Wuxiao Subruler, which I will talk about later. And then for the main deck, for Ashwyn, which is one of the key important cards, 4 copies of Empty Vessel, and then 1 Searing Dead, 1 Cryptid. And then we have 3 Bloodfire Battlefield. And then for generic resonators, we have 4 Dark Alice for some consistency, 3 Suya, 3 Mikage Rhea, 2 Tinkerbells, 2 Rumsfeld, 2 Alabaster Shaman, 1 Lunar Jester, and 1 Royal Crescent Guard. And then for Chance, 3 Girls Staring At, along with 3 Necro Barrier, 2 Sylvia's Burning Flame, and then a 1 of Uppercut. And then for stones, just 4 Ebon Home, 3 Gravestone, 2 Remnants, and then 1 Heaven's Rift. So overall, there's 8 dark sources, 6 fire sources, 6 light sources, 3 moon sources, and then 2 green sources for Shiva. For the side deck, we have Shiva, Rogue Spectator, and Fire Pit Trap, who we are revealing every time because I'm not siding the Fate Regalia. Then we have 2 Therapists, we have 2 Spirits of the Crimson Moon, we have 2 more Uppercuts, we have 2 Hellfires, a Hydrogen Star of Light, the third copy of Alabaster, and the fourth copy of Bloodfire, and then a Cryptid in case we want to side out the Fate Regalia. Alright, so let's talk about what are some of these other ways that you can build and play this deck. So starting off, as I mentioned, you can play it more aggressively. The best way you can do this, some of the best ways you can do this is with Cane of the Salamander, along with, you can play things like Mechanized Blade Dragon. You saw I was already playing Sylvia's Burning Flame. These can buff up your multi-strike resonators so that they do a ton of damage, because it basically doubles any buffs that they get. And then Cane can give any of your stuff swiftness, so you can just immediately swing with an Ashwyn or any other bodies that you happen to be playing. If you're playing Blade Dragon, it is a dragon, so you can also play Daji. You can also play Sealed One Eye. These add some extra burn and draw power. You can also play things like Pack of Hounds or Lucifer, which adds some life loss. Since Burn is hit by Star Scale and Life Loss is hit by Grimoire, if you play some of both, it increases your chances of one of them working, which is pretty strong. So this deck can be very strong aggressively. You can also play things in a more aggro version like Angelic Battle Barrier or Dance of Spirits to just say, hey, opponent, you can't play anything for the rest of this turn, and I'm just going to go in and kill you. So on a turn where you have enough for lethal, you can just play one of those to lock in, that like fully lock it in. Another way you can play this deck is with Infantry, Queen's Herald, Dusk Knight, Lunar Throne, and or Cross Punch. All of these let you mill the opponent's deck faster, so you can just mill the opponent out really fast. Struggles a little bit more against faster decks, but works really well against more like slower control decks or decks that are more toolboxy, decks that want to have a lot of options in their deck because you're suddenly removing all their options. Another thing you can do with this deck is lean heavier into darkness and play Obsidian Skulls. I'm opting to play Gravestones in my list, but you can also play a bunch of Darkstones and play Obsidian Skull, and there's a lot of really fun payoffs for that in the form of Anti-Aircraft Tank, Abhorrent Revival, Laboratory of Blessing, or you can play Aimul and just stat neg the opponent's board a bunch. So all of those are really strong payoffs. It is slightly slower. You do need to... It gets a lot stronger in the late game because you can make a ton of will off Obsidian Skull. Other options that you can play in this deck are any of the other Lunar Duty bodies. I was already playing the Lunar Jester and one Crescent Moon. But you can also play Solar Minstrel with Protect and forces the enemy's stuff to attack it. Lunar Priest and Lunar Necromancer. And you can also play the other Royal Guard Waning Moon, which also has Protect and Barrier and gains you some life. So any of those are very strong. They do unfortunately lose to Mask and Therapist because your ruler will lose its abilities, but any of them except for the Priest, you can dump any of them with Mikage Rhea, or you can pitch them off Dark Alice's, and then they're just free, not free, but they're bodies that you can play out of the grave. And then speaking of bodies, Hue is a very strong body. It won't have, it's unchaseable, but it does get you tokens on field, still floodgates the opponent. It's still got keywords, so it's still a very strong guy. Another good body, especially for Paradox, is Dragonoid Beekeeper, who you can just flash in, and could also be good in the aggro version or just any other version. Against aggro stuff, there's a lot of anti-aggro options in the form of Lunar Protective Lifeform, Crystal Apple, Constantino, Castle of Belial, Solaria's Fire, and Lumia. Any of these can put a halt to aggro decks, just depending on what aggro deck you're trying to stop. Lumia can also combo with Dante Enters the Game of Gods for a really strong draw engine, and she's also removal. Against Mask or any other like Regalia or Edition decks, There's Goat, Judgment of Solari, or Seal of Lenneth are all outs to mask. Judgment of Solari and Seal of Lenneth also have like more utility. They have other uses. Since you're playing Giotto, Seal of Lenneth can just remove anything, so that's a very strong removal option. For Resonator removal, there's Sealed Stone of Iga, Zero's Light Lightning, Hellfire, Flashing Smile, and if you diversify your stones a little bit more, you can play Ultra Magic Stone Golem. All of these get around barrier in some way, and they're all just good removal. Raymond and Armor of the King of Kings are both ways that you can give your stuff Eternal for more protection. I'm already playing Rumsfeld in my version, which can also give Eternal and Barrier. There's also any of the Dark Chance, like Look of Corruption, any of the just one cost look at the opponent's hand and take a card. Any of those are good options, especially since this deck doesn't get access to almost any cancels, really. So instead of canceling the opponent's stuff, you kind of have to preemptively remove from the opponent's hand whatever might be a problem. Look of Corruption, I think, is the best one cost chant for that, but you can also play Suya, which I'm already main decking 3 of, and use the Curse of Ragnarok side to remove a card from the opponent's hand. So when it comes to building this deck, one of the biggest decision points is whether or not you want to play the Wu Zhao Sub-Ruler, and whether or not you want to side an Empty Vessel to bring in as a Sub-Ruler. I chose to play the Wu Zhao Sub-Ruler, and I'm not even siding Empty Vessel. You can also play the Wu Zhao Sub-Ruler and still side an Empty Vessel. It will just always go to hand at the start of turn with Fate, since you already control a Sub-Ruler. Advantages and disadvantages to this. When you don't play Wu Zhao and rely on the Fate Sub-Ruler, it's a little bit more of a gamble. You're hoping that you go first so that you can start with the Empty Vessel Sub-Ruler. So playing the Wu Zhao is a little more consistent. Having the Empty Vessel and no Wu is a little more high risk, high reward. It's a little better for the aggro build as well, because it's better like early game to have this. In the Wu version, you can still get the Empty Vessel Sub-Ruler, you just have to Judgment Gill, so you get it later. With Wu, it feels a little better for control, because you can go later into the game, or you get stronger later into the game, because then you end up with both Sub-Rulers, both able to pay for your Ruler's activates. And Wu also allows you to make the Pitch Black Moon Sub-Rulers, which allows you to Judgment Giotto later. And Giotto's Judgment basically acts as like a second Gill Judgment. Really just depends on personal preference and like what you're trying to do with the deck. In my version, I'm deciding to play the Wu and play it a little bit more mid-range to control. That's not every option that you can play in the deck, obviously. I'm not going to go over everything, but that's some of the more notable ones that you can play. So there's a lot of directions you can take this deck. Now, why did I choose to build it how I built it? Alright, so now I'm going to go back through my deck list card by card and talk about exactly why I chose to play the ratios that I did over other cards. So Ashwyn is pretty self-explanatory. She's just a staple 4 in any Gill Giotto. For Empty Vessel, so I'm not siding one because I don't like having bricks in my deck, so only having one of each of the bricky ones feels a lot better to me, and having more of these to go through so that I can just keep fogging the opponent with it more times throughout a game feels nice. And then just one of each of these because you have to have 10 cryptids, so that's how that is. And also, since I'm playing Wu, then it's not like I can start with the Sub-Ruler anyways, and I'd rather have access to Shiva, Rogue, and the Fire Pit Trap. 3 Bloodfire Battlefield. I was playing 4 of this in my first take of it. I just cut it down to 3, but it is really good. Like, I'm citing the 4th one. Stops mirrors, stops stuff like the apple in against Zero, their apple regalia. It stops that. gets your cryptids out of your hand so that you can cycle them for other cards, and then just removes everything from the game. Just it's got a lot of utility from it. For Dark Alice, this is because the cryptid cards, you can play them from grave, so this pitches them from grave, but you also, there's not a ton of ways for this deck to dig. Most of the draw power in the deck comes from when you play a cryptid, getting a draw from the extension rule. So getting some extra draw power from Dark Alice that you can just use whenever without having to resolve an Ashwyn is pretty good, especially if you can't find an Ashwyn, because sometimes you just don't see Ashwyn, and she's kind of like she's like the most important card of the deck. So having a way to dig for her is good. Plus, there's a lot of like easy discard fodder for Dark Alice. There's also the Lunar Duty guys that you can just pitch off this. 3 Suya. This used to be Look of Corruption, but what I found was Look of Corruption felt better late in the game because I would want to Look of Corruption before like going in for a push. Suya, on the other hand, has more utility early game as a body, and to like, it's another mask out. Ashwyn is already just the best mask out, but Suya gives you another way. He just has more utility early game. And then the Curse of Ragnarok side of him just still gives you access to a hand rip later in the game when you do need a hand rip. So I just decided to, instead of play Look of Corruptions, play Suya's. He just has a little more versatility. And then Rhea. You can also dump Suya off Rhea, so it has a little more versatility that way, or you can pitch him off the Dark Alice. Rhea's just let you send any of your Lunar Duty guys. You can also Rhea to send Ashwyn so that you can play her from grave. You can also Rhea to send the zombie ones, Searing Dead, and then that gets brought back off the addition. So there's a lot of stuff you can do with Rhea, sending stuff. And then she's also just a 4/4 flying drain, so you can just swing 4, gain 4. A couple Tinkerbells. There's enough 2-drops in this that it feels worth it. Just a board wipe. You all know Tinkerbell is good, but there's also enough 1-drops in this too that you can usually find some way to get both effects. Draw 2, wipe the board. 2 Rumsfeld to protect your own board. If you hold off on judgmenting Gill until you get a Rumsfeld set up and can protect him, it feels pretty good because Gill is pretty vulnerable by himself, like on his judgment. So having Rumsfeld to protect him so that you can, like, because his judgment has a ton of value, it's just completely unprotected. So having something to keep him alive is nice. It turns off Glorius and Charlotte's activates, which is super important because that turns off Charlotte's cancels, keeps them from cycling, so they get stuck with their bricky cards. Do have to pay an extra 1 to activate it under Mask, but you're usually, like in the matchups I've played of this deck against Mask, you're usually outing Mask by like turn 2 or 3, like pretty easily. And then a couple Alabaster Shaman. Most decks just at all cheat something in or have some kind of discount on something. If they don't, you can just side this out. It does hurt yourself a little bit, but not usually as much as it hurts the opponent. And you can also, like, there's ways that you can get rid of it from yourself. You can always just crash it into something if there's something to crash it into. You can also target yourself with Suya to banish it, or you can sack it off with Dark Alice, or you can, if you're really desperate, you can remove it from the game with Ashwyn, and Ashwyn removes it before cheating in a cryptid, so you can remove your own Alabaster, cheat in a cryptid. And sometimes that's actually useful because Ashwyn has to remove a Resonator, so if the opponent doesn't have anything, having your own thing to remove is good. But yeah, no matter how much she hurts yourself, she hurts the opponent more because you're always using it in response to something. So it's always hurting the opponent first and foremost, just because it's being used reactively. And then the lunar guys, I chose these ones over the other options, mostly because, well, Lunar Jester is just the best one, like, hands down, but I chose the Crescent Moon one because between this one and its twin, the Waning Moon or whatever it is, they both can be brought back without paying moon. It's light or moon, and then the other one is dark or moon, whereas Jester only takes moon. So if you don't see your gravestone, but you still want to bring back a body, then one of those is good. And I chose this guy over the dark one because the dark one has barrier protect, which is good. However, this one has drain bane, so this one's kind of a better blocker because of the bane. So it's a repeatable bane blocker versus a repeatable protector. Protect is good. It just kind of depends. Depends on what you're up against. But I think a repeatable bane blocker is a little better, especially since it also has drain, so you're also gaining life when you block, versus the other one gains life when you hit the right stone. So this one's gaining life more consistently, and then also the resonance gives it +1/+1 counters, so you can get it really big. And then if the resonance dark magic stone puts -1/-1 counters, so it's also potentially removal, and the bane is also removal to swing it into something. You can still be as burning flame this, so it has precision and swing it into whatever you want, and then also gets the bunch of drain. So this one just feels a little better. Another thing to note with the Crescent Moon versus the Waning Moon is 0 can't take away drain or bane, but 0 does take away barrier. So 0 beats the other one, 0 does not beat this one, just with what keywords it has. And then 3, Girls Staring At. It's Girls Staring At. It's just, this card is just really good. Completely understandably banned in Paradox. Just turns the opponent's stuff off for a turn. There's not really any cancels in this deck, so this plus the Necro Barriers, these are kind of the closest things you have to a cancel. They stop ender effects. Necro Barrier specifically stops ender effects. And then Girls Staring At is just an expensive Necro Barrier that draws a card. It turns off everything. Necro Barrier is also really important against 0, because you can't cancel 4 because it's untouchable. So very good against 0 because then it stops their ramping. And then Necro Barrier you can also play off the coin, whereas Girls Staring At you can't. But Girls Staring At stops more. And then for removal we have 2 Burning Flame and 1 Uppercut. Burning Flame is also good as a way to finish out the game. You can buff up an Ashwyn +8, and then she becomes a 15, swinging for 15 with multi-strike, which is 3,000 damage. So that's just game most of the time, because you can also swing with Gill for 1,000 in the air. Uppercut just removes stuff that Burning Flame can't, because this only shoots for 800, and then this also is good against stuff that's all the same races, because then it just pops one thing and then wipes everything with the same race. And then the second mode in this is a bit weird because you need to get the Sub-Ruler out first, or the Regalia out first, before you can look at the opponent's face down cards. So you won't have anything to target with this until you get to the Regalia, but once you get to that point where you can see any of their cards, you have a wide selection to choose from because you're constantly removing their cards. So you've seen all the cards that you can play in this deck. There's a lot of reasons to play all the different cards, but there's one card that stands out above all others, and that is Ashwyn. Ashwyn is the heart and soul of this deck, and so let's talk about how to use her. On her enter, she will remove a Resonator or Regalia from the game. That is mandatory, and then search your deck for a non-chant cryptid, cheat it into the field. She also, whenever you play a spell with cost 1 or more without paying its cost, you burn the opponent. You can also pay 0 to put 2 cards from their removed area on bottom to gain +1 and Eternal. That's not once per turn. And she gives all your cryptids Multi-Strike Bane. So she's giving everything a buff with the Multi-Strike Bane. She can buff herself and gain Eternal so she can protect herself. On enter, she removes a card and cheats in a card and lets you life lost the opponent later after you judgment. And then that, in combination with the extension rule, also makes it so that when she enters, you'll draw a card. And if you cheat in a Cryptid Resonator, you'll also draw another card. And you can play her from grave, because she's a cryptid. So, all in all, you play it, you draw a card, you remove an opponent's thing, you cheat in a guy, you draw another card. So you're going +4 in card advantage there, and putting on a bunch of pressure. So that's a huge tempo push. She's probably going to be the main target of any of your opponent's cancels or anything like that. So when you play her, you want to make it count. You want to make full use of everything that she offers. So when you play Ashwyn, there's a couple things that you can grab. You can either grab the Empty Vessel, which won't get you a draw, but will floodgate the opponent for a turn, keep them from attacking and stuff, and then that also sets you up for when you judgment. You can flip this over to be the sub-ruler. Or you can grab one of the bodies, either the cryptid or the zombie. So, early game, one of these two is definitely better. If the opponent already has an established board and is going to be coming at you aggressively, this one's better because it stops their attacks. But these are more, these give you more card advantage, so they draw you more cards, and they also put on more pressure because they're bodies. They'll get the multi-strike. You can Sylvia's Burning Flame them with the multi-strike. 90% of the time in the early game off of Ashwyn, I grab the cryptid. Later in the game, I'll be more likely to grab Empty Vessel, but I would only grab Empty Vessel if you actually either plan on judgmenting that turn or the following turn, or if you really need the floodgate, if the opponent is threatening to kill you. That's the only time I would grab Empty Vessel off Ashwyn. Otherwise, Empty Vessel is better in hand to flash it in on the opponent's turn, because then you force them to commit to something before you fog them. Otherwise, this is 6 times 2, 7 times 2, that's 14 plus 12, that's 2600 damage just by themselves, and Multi-Strike Bane means that anything they block will die first, and then they still get hit. So this is going to just keep pushing, picking away at the opponent. And then this is also speeding up your removing the opponent's cards. So once, if an Ashwyn resolves, it puts you very far ahead. It forces a lot out of the opponent to deal with Ashwyn. And then even if she's dealt with, if she goes to grave, you can play her back from grave. So very important card. You want to protect her with all of your life. She's very important. So when to go for Empty Vessel, Gill Lapis takes, you need 6 cards face down to fully discount his judgment. So yeah, usually by turn 3 or 4 you'll have it discounted enough. But even if you do get it discounted enough, you want to wait. First of all, you need to wait until you have Empty Vessel out before you judgment if you want to get the sub-ruler. And the other thing is you want to not be fully tapping out into judgment, because his judgment side is very unprotected. It has no barrier, no eternal or anything like that. So when you judgment, you gotta watch out for removal. You will have access to playing the opponent's cards for interaction. So what I would recommend doing is you get the Empty Vessel out, use the Empty Vessel's ability to look at the opponent's face down cards. If they have cards in their removed area that you can copy that are going to be able to protect your Gill Lapis, any cancels, if there's a mirror, if there's girl staring at anything like that, then it's maybe still worth it to tap out into Judgment, even if you're tapping yourself out, because you will have, when this flips over, you'll have 2 will to activate Gill, so that can get you a mirror, that can get you a GST, that can get you a lot of things. Whether or not you tap out into Judgment really just kind of depends. As I mentioned at the very start of the video, you match the opponent's tempo. If the opponent taps out into something to like try and push, then you can, like, in response to them like playing their guys, or like in response to them entering combat, go empty vessel, fog them for the turn, so now they can't aggro you, and then going into your next turn, now you're able to Judgment, get the Fate Ruler, now suddenly things are like fully flipped and you're taking the initiative. You have he can give himself Swiftness Flying, so you just like hit for 1,000, plus you have the Fate sub-rulers. You can use his ability to copy their cards, play some of their cards, and then life loss them some with the empty vessel, or if you have Ashwyn out, life loss them even more. So you kind of flip things fully in your favor with a well-timed empty vessel, which is why empty vessel is better to be playing from hand, because it'll have quick cast. You can do it as they go into combat. So it feels a little better there, as opposed to grabbing it off Ashwyn. So, Ashwyn, proactive, empty vessel, reactive. Okay, so I have a few little combos, and not really combos, but interactions in the deck that I want to talk about that are important to keep in mind while you're playing this deck. So the first thing I want to talk about is I'm playing Alabaster and I'm playing Tinkerbell. If I happen to see both of these cards, Alabaster is a 2-cost. Tinkerbell wipes the board if I play a 2-cost. However, if I have Alabaster out, Tinkerbell will get removed instead of hitting field, so it will never trigger. So what do? The way you have to play this, like specific combination of cards, and this goes for any deck that's playing both of these, is pay 1, activate Tinkerbell first. Tinkerbell hits field, gets removed, the enter trigger goes on chase. In response to the enter trigger, pay 1, Alabaster. Alabaster hits field, and then enter trigger, resolve, wipe the opponent's board. The next interaction I want to talk about is between, you happen to draw your Searing Dead and you have Bloodfire. What you do is pay 2, flash in the Bloodfire whenever you want to play it, so like usually in response to something, so that this hits field and then stops their thing from resolving, whatever their 1-cost non-resonator thing is. You flash this in, enter trigger, response to the enter, tap to pitch and draw a card, and then enter resolves to bring back the zombie, and then enter trigger to put something back. Burn them for 4 plus trigger to draw cards. Then you draw another card off of the extension rule. So now you've drawn 2 cards and gotten body. Otherwise, you can still do this just by getting Searing Dead Engrave off of like Rhea to dump it. And so that's why there's just the one of Searing Dead. The next like niche little interaction I want to talk about is with Ashwyn when there's no resonators on board, because Ashwyn's enter is a mandatory remove a resonator. So if there's no other resonators or regalia, then she has to remove herself. So in response to her enter, it's very possible that the opponent sacks off their resonator somehow, and you're left with no choice but to try and remove herself. So that's where you can use Dark Alice. You can also do this even if the opponent just doesn't have anything in general, just as like a late game thing. If you have a bunch of extra will, you can play Ashwyn, and then in response to her enter, flash in Dark Alice, and then Dark Alice of course will draw, you sack itself, or sack the Ashwyn, draw, sack the Dark Alice, so now there's just no resonators on field, so then it doesn't remove anything, and then gets you the Cryptid from deck. So this gets you get the draw off Ashwyn, you get 2 draws off Dark Alice, you're drawing 3 cards, plus if you get a Cryptid body, it draws you a 4th card, unless you get the Regalia. and that puts the Ashwyn back in grave, so now you can play it out of the grave later off the extension rule, versus if you play this and it's the only resonator, it's gonna have to remove itself, and then now it's removed from game, so you can't play it from grave anymore. Okay, so you heard me talk a lot about how to play Gill Giotto, and whether or not you plan on playing it, or if you're preparing to play against it, it's important to know some of the cards that are very good against this deck. So, first up, if your deck happens to lose to Giotto pretty bad, because you need your graveyard, there's not a whole ton of options, but we have Divine Lightning, which can turn her off for one turn, or Tang Song can prevent your stuff from being removed from the game for a turn if you play a chant. These are not perfect outs at all, but they're kind of the best we have right now. Other than that, another really good specific answer to Gill Giotto is Lumia's Rage. They let you just repeatedly shuffle back all your removed cards back into the deck, so they never have cards removed face down. It keeps them off of Gill's Judgment, keeps them off of giving their Ashwyn Eternal. So that's a more targeted out to the deck. Another good generic card against Gill Giotto is going to be Vacus. The reason being is Vacus expels a target, can expel a target resonator, so you can expel their Ashwyn. So that's a form of removal that doesn't destroy, so it gets around Eternal, and doesn't put it in the graveyard, so they can't replay it. And more importantly, Vacus has a God's Art that lets you expel all of their regalia. So if they play an empty vessel, you can just expel all of their empty vessels, and then they no longer have access to the sub-ruler. So that's a very good way that you can just completely take them out of the game. It does get removed by Ashwyn, so if you play Vacus first and then they Ashwyn you, then he will die, but he at least trades with the Ashwyn, because you can tap him -6 the Ashwyn, and then the Ashwyn will still die. So he just trades favorably with this deck. If you get him set up with the God's Art, it just keeps them off the regalia, which also keeps them off of wanting to Judgment. In the same vein as that, high speed uppercut treatment, if they get an Ashwyn engrave or get the regalia engrave, you can just expel all of that card from their deck. So now no more Ashwyns is like huge for you. No more empty vessels when they haven't gotten the sub-ruler yet is pretty huge. Gill Giotto relies a lot on 2 costs, so something like Hue, especially an unchaseable Hue, can set them back quite a bit. Takes away their access to Ashwyn. Since it's unchaseable, they can't even like respond to it with an empty vessel or anything. So you can just Hue and then go into combat and not be getting fogged. And again, because there's so many 2 costs, Goliath's Command Destroy Point lets you not only cancel a lot of Gill Giotto's cards, but it also removes them face down. So if you cancel something like a Ashwyn, then that's going to remove it face down, so they can't just replay it. So Goliath's Command is probably the best cancel against this deck specifically, but there's also options like Sword of Prague or Persephone that can also cancel 2 costs or higher. Things like Mirror aren't going to be as good against this deck. There's a few 1-drops, but not as many super impactful ones. Cancels like Goliath's Command or Omni cancels like Sword of Prague are going to be your best bet. As I mentioned before with some of the interactions with Dark Alice, if the opponent plays an Ashwyn, you can respond to that Ashwyn with Dark Alice, sacking itself plus whatever your other 1 card on field is, and now you don't have any targets on field for them, so they have to remove their own Ashwyn or something else on their field, so they have to remove their own card, and because you're sacking off your things for Dark Alice, it converts it to value, so you get to draw cards and make them remove their own thing. And this situation comes up a lot in the Glorious matchup, because there will be times where you're just sitting on with Mask on field, and the Gill Giotto wants to play Ashwyn to out the Mask and just wants to like proactively just drop Ashwyn out the Mask. You can, in response to that, flash in Dallas, sack off your own mask, sack off Dallas, so you've converted it to value. They still got to out the mask, but now they have to remove their Ashwyn, so Ashwyn's gone, and you got cards out of it. Another good out to Ashwyn is Zero's Light Lightning because it expels it, because it's a Darkness Resonator, and a lot of Gill Giotto's other stuff is Darkness Resonators, so you can expel those with Light Lightning. You can also use Light Lightning to destroy their Gill J-Ruler side if they use the activate to give it a keyword, because then it will have more keywords than its printed keywords. So that's a way you can out the J-Ruler. You can also just use any other generic J-Ruler removal, such as like an attack order, so that when they judgment, you can just immediately pop it before they get too much value off of it, or before they are able to life loss you too much. There's also more like specific J-Ruler answers like Executioner, Replicant Blazer, Black Moon Ray, or Black Moon Beam, which can be unchaseable. It's also good in this matchup to have instant speed Regalia removal. For example, Spirits of the Crimson Moon or Claimed by the Depths are pretty good, like instant speed Regalia removal. There's a lot of other options out there, but those are two really good ones. And then Lunar Oxidizer is also Regalia removal that turns off the sub-ruler. So you can turn off Wu and pop their Regalia at the same time, which super like sets them back in terms of like trying to judgment, which is one of their best win cons. It does get removed by Ashwyn, but everything gets removed by Ashwyn, so you're always going to have to answer Ashwyn. Therapist against Gill Giotto, specifically if you have solo mode, is really good, because the solo mode says it can't be removed from game, while the opponent has Giotto. Giotto is trying to replace it going anywhere else with getting removed from game, so then it just doesn't go anywhere else. So it's basically unkillable protector that you can just use it. You can use it for the protect so that you can like stop attacks, and that also beats multi-strike, and it also turns off all their races so they can't grab their cryptids and stuff. Probably the best answer to Ashwyn is going to be Mina Harker. Not only does she expel Ashwyn, but she also keeps them off of playing any other Ashwyns until they out the Mina Harker, and any other Darkness Resonators in general. So no any other cryptids, no Suyas, anything like that. Another card that a lot of people are running now is Fates Reunited. While this isn't like a specific counter to Gill Giotto, it does have a few good cards that you can call. So I would recommend one, calling Gravestone for sure. Most Gill Giotto decks are playing Gravestone. Otherwise, if they're playing the Skullstone, you can call Skullstone. Along with that, either Ashwyn to prevent them from getting Eternal, or depending on what other cards you can see, you can call their Tinkerbell so they can't wipe your board. It really just depends what cards they're playing, but I would for sure first call Gravestone so that they can't put you behind on Will. But other than that, it's just anything you want. I would probably recommend Ashwyn if you don't know what else to call, just as a default. From the Gill Giotto side, looking at each of these cards, so I'm just going to go back through them. Divine Lightning and Tang Song, there's honestly not a whole lot that you even like would want to do against those. Like, I don't think you care too much if you get your Giotto turned off for a turn. Like, most of those decks that are wanting to use the graveyard that bad, you usually have other outs for, in the form of like a shaman or a girl staring at for the turn. Against Lumia's Rage, you can respond to it with a Bloodfire Battlefield and it'll get removed from game, or you can wipe it with Tinkerbell. It is really annoying to get hit with Lumia's Rage every turn, so you do want to out it as fast as possible. Suya is another out. You probably won't run into Lumia's Rage too often though. You have outs to it, but against Vakis, against Vakis, if Vakis try and expel your Ashwyn, you always have Dark Alice that you can flash in and sack it off to get it back in grave, so that it's not getting expelled. But more importantly, the Vakis Gods art, you really want to watch out for that, because you don't want to get all of your empty vessels expelled. So if they try and Vakis, if they have a Vakis, don't play empty vessel first of all. If they cast Vakis, while the empty vessel is already on the field and they have the will up that they could God's Art it, you want to have a Dark Alice like at the ready, so you can respond to the God's Art by sacking off empty vessel so that it's not getting all expelled. You can also uppercut pops it. You can Girl Staring At or Necro Barrier in response to its enter. So there's a few things that you can do to work around the Vacus. The main thing is just be careful about the God's Art. If the opponent has a Vacus, don't drop the empty vessel. It's going to get expelled. Against an opponent's uppercut treatment, when they're trying to expel all of your Ashwyns or all of your empty vessels by like targeting one that's in your grave, Dark Alice actually deals with this with her first effect of saying cards in your grave can't be the target of chance spells. So again, Dark Alice to the rescue. Dark Alice stops your stuff in grave getting targeted there. If they target something in your removed area, there's not a whole lot you can do about that, but it is what it is. It is important to note that if they play the uppercut with its alternative cost, it gets stopped by Bloodfire, so you can always just Bloodfire cancel it. Hue, there's not really any counterplay to Hue. It's unchaseable. You can preemptively drop a Necro Barrier or a Girl Staring At if you're on the read that they have a Hue, and you really need to go into your next turn not being under Hue. You can preempt that, but you can't always know. You're not always going to know. The more you play, the more you'll get kind of an intuitive sense for that, but you can't always know. So there's going to be times where you just get hit with Hue and you can't do anything about it. All the cancels like Glorius Command, Sword of Prague, Persephone, most of them get stopped by Bloodfire Battlefield, except for Persephone. And getting hit by Persephone isn't that bad because you can just replay it. Bloodfire Battlefield is your biggest friend, but Bloodfire Battlefield also gets stopped by Glorius Command, so it's really just a matter of you're trying to use a 2 cost to stop a 1 cost, which just doesn't feel good, so you're going to be at the disadvantage against those specific cancels. But if you can get a Bloodfire Battlefield established, that's going to be the most important thing, because that's going to set you up to be able to make proactive plays later without anything stopping you at all. And then the Dark Alice interaction with Dark Alice in response to an Ashwyn. The best thing you can do against this is just be aware of it. Just have either your own Dark Alice in hand ready to respond, or have something to stop its enter, or just don't play Ashwyn into a board that's just a single card. Against things like Zero's Light Lightning and Attack Order, you can stop it with Bloodfire. Again, a lot of these cards, you can still stop with Bloodfire. Same thing with the Attack Order. But without Bloodfire, it's probably going to get expelled because it's untouchable. There's not a lot you can do about it. In terms of them trying to destroy your J Ruler with either the Light Lightning or the Attack Order, assuming you don't have Bloodfire Battlefield, can preempt it by getting Imperishable with the Woo. Or if you have Rumsfeld, you can get the Eternal Barrier and then they can't target it. Rumsfeld, good for protection. Bloodfire Battlefield stops most of the things that are a threat, and then Woo giving Imperishable. Any of those can give you access to protecting your Judgment. And then same thing against Executioner targets, Blazer targets, so Rumsfeld stops those. Black Moonray gets stopped by Battlefield unless they pay the Awakening cost, and Black Moonbeam is unchaseable, so there's not anything you can do unless you preempt it. So, and then against all the Regalia removals, there's in the case of Lunar Oxidizer, Necro Barrier is a really clean out. And same thing with Spirits of the Crimson Moon. Spirits of the Crimson Moon, if you just stop its enter, it's fine. Claimed by the Depths gets stopped by Bloodfire unless they pay the full cost. Against Therapist, the best natural out that you're probably already running is just Girl Staring At plus any other removal. Other than that, you can use anything that bounces it or returns it to deck. Against Mina Harker, there's not a ton of good options against her, which is why I would say just be careful when you use your Ashwyn. Play Ashwyn when the opponent is either tapped out or when you can Girl Staring At before recovery so that you don't get hit by something like this. To out Fates Reunited, the outs are pretty much the same as any of your mask outs, just Ashwyn, Suya, Tinkerbell, any of those can remove it. And also you're not too worried about Fates, as it only turns off like a couple things. It doesn't turn off any of your enter triggers or anything like that. So you're not too worried about it, but keep in mind it will unreveal your Rogue Shiva and Fire Pit Trap. So if you know your opponent is playing Fates, just remember when you side deck, side in like the Cryptid and side out one of your Regalias so that you can start with the Regalia instead, since Rogue Shiva is not going to do anything. So there's counterplay to the counterplay. There's counterplay to this deck and there's counterplay to that counterplay. And I imagine there's probably other cards that are good into this matchup. I haven't played every single matchup in the entire game into Gill Giotto, so I do not know everything ever, but this is what I've found to be notable. It is a very diverse meta right now. There's a lot of decks that are viable, and Gill Giotto has a pretty good matchup into a lot of decks, but there are a few tier 1 contenders that I think have pretty decent matchups into Gill Giotto, so I'm going to talk about a few of those, either so you can play one of those decks if you want to beat this deck, or so that you can prepare for them if you plan on playing Gill Giotto. But first, I want to talk about the mirror match. So in the Gill Giotto mirror match, both of you are locking each other out of your graves. Both of you want to resolve an Ashwyn, and both of you want to get to Judgment before the other. So the mirror match is going to be a lot of just trying to stop the opponent's Ashwyn from resolving, so you're going to want to keep things up like a Girl Staring At or a Necro Barrier to stop the opponent's Ashwyn. And you can also just not play to board so that they don't have a target for Ashwyn. And then once you find an opening, then play your own Ashwyn. You can flash in Empty Vessel before recovery to threaten Judgment and stop them from attacking on their turn. Because you're losing access to your graveyard, you're going to want to side out stuff like Rhea and the Lunar Duty guys. Instead, you can side in stuff like I play Spirit of the Crimson Moon, which can pop their own Bloodfire Battlefield or their Regalia. Or you can side in Uppercuts so that you can try and expel all of their Ashwins. The best advice I can give you for the mirror match is just to try not to be too impatient. We also have to address the other elephant in the format, Glorious Charlotte. Your biggest asset against Glorious Charlotte is going to be Giotto, who will keep them off of their Aqua Feather Phoenixes and punish them for cycling with Glorious by having them just be removing cards face down more. It also prevents their Divine Beast from going back to hand, or their other Divine Beast from coming back into the field from grave, and it prevents any of their reanimating shenanigans. One of the biggest things you have to worry about in the Glorious Charlotte matchup is just outing Mask off the bat. Luckily, Gill Giotto is already usually playing stuff that's going to be able to outmask anyways. Ashwyn, Suya, GST, and Tinkerbell are what I have in mind, but there's other options, but these are pretty good ones. Aside from just outing Mask, Glorious Charlotte decks really like to play to board. They usually have certain boss resonators that they're trying to kill you with, or floodgate resonators like Reasonable that they want to lock you down with. So things like Girl Staring At, which can turn all of these off, or Tinkerbell to just wipe the board, are going to be really nice to have as well. Bloodfire Battlefield is also another way to wipe their board, but it's a little expensive. They are, however, not usually affected by the floodgate effect of Bloodfire, just because usually they don't play any one-cost non-resonator spells other than the occasional Light Lightning. Aside from that, Rumsfeld also turns off most of their interactions by turning off Charlotte. So with that being said, my main deck is mostly well equipped to take on Glorious Charlotte. In all my testing with this particular list, I've never lost to Glorious Charlotte. However, if you're playing the more aggressive version of Gill Giotto, you might struggle a little more against Glorious Charlotte, so in that case consider siding something like a Rumsfeld or maybe some more mask outs. Against K4, the biggest thing you're going to have to worry about is cancels. The biggest one they play is Feething and also sometimes Lorite, both of which get stopped by a GST or a Necro Barrier. So you can hold off, play one of these before recovery to try and bait out a cancel, and then going to make your play, or if you have the will for it, you can make your play, have will up to play one of these in response to their cancel, and then resolve whatever you need to resolve. Once you are able to get something to resolve against K4, you're going to be in a pretty good spot because K4 really likes to play to board and you have really good board breakers. Ashwyn can just remove their Yakami without targeting it. Bloodfire Battlefield also removes it, and every other edition they control, plus locks them out of one-cost editions, so Bloodfire is pretty much like the best out against K4 if you can get it to resolve. And then Tinkerbell is also just another board wipe. An important thing to note about Bloodfire is that it is an edition, so it's unaffected by the Scepter floodgate that prevents you from playing more than one non-edition spell. This means if you're successfully able to force out a cancel before recovery, you can then still cast this, even if you already played a spell, because it's an edition. We also play some other interaction that can force out cancels from K4. An uppercut, specifically on a kimono, is very strong because that threatens to expel all their kimonos, so this will almost always eat a cancel. Alabaster Shaman also makes any of the kimonos that they would cheat in off of Yakami get expelled or removed instead. In this matchup, it's very unlikely that they're going to be able to pull off the alt win because you're removing their kimonos face down. So as long as you remove at least one kimono, you won't get hit with the alt win, which means they're probably going to try and attack you with Yakami, just to pump it up really big, or swing with a bunch of rabbit tokens or something like that, all of which you can stop with Empty Vessel by stopping them from attacking for the turn. At the very least, this can eat a cancel and then you can Bloodfire them. Out of the side deck, I have a lot of good options. There's the 4th copy of Bloodfire, which you definitely want to side in so that you have as many copies of it as possible to try and resolve. Another Alabaster is nice to have as well, along with 2 more uppercuts, as I talked about before. Spirits of the Crimson Moon is another way that you can try and out the Scepter, at the very least bait out a cancel, and you can do this at the end of their turn before going into your turn, so that you aren't under the floodgate effect. And then Therapist, of course, takes away the treasury item race, which shuts off Yakami's cheating stuff in and also prevents them from getting treasury items off the top with their ruler. And it is also relevant in this matchup the effect that they can't recover entities, because Scepter does recover treasury items and they do like tapping treasury items for effects. Overall, just always assume they have cancels, and once you have an opening where you know they can't cancel, then go for a Bloodfire, wipe their stuff, win the game from there. Another good Fate deck right now is 0/6 Sage of Light. Against 0, it's going to be different depending on whether you're going first or second. If the 0 is going first, they're going to start with their sub-ruler, guaranteed because it's untouchable. This means Rumsfeld will be useless, Ashwyn won't be able to gain Eternal to protect herself, and the Alabaster will lose its barrier, making it a valid target for the sub-ruler to pop. So you should probably side out Rumsfeld and Alabaster, and don't activate Ashwyn's ability. You're basically just locked out of that while they have the sub-ruler. Then if they decide to activate the God's Art of their Apple to cheat in the addition, Necro Barrier is going to be your best friend there. You can play it off of coin, so even if they try and do it turn 1, you can Necro Barrier that and then prevent them from getting the ramp. Girls Staring At can also stop their enter effects, but Necro Barrier is just the cheaper version of that. Once 0 starts ramping a lot, it can be very hard to catch up, so being able to stop their ramp is very important. Another thing you have to be aware of in this matchup with your Ashwyn is against 4, because 4 says it doesn't take battle damage, your Bane trigger won't trigger. So if you swing with Ashwyn and they block with 4, your Ashwyn will die and therefore will survive. 4 also has precision, so even if you don't attack, they can play 4 and then swing into it anyways. So 4 will pretty much always kill Ashwyn. Because of this, I would recommend only playing Ashwyn if they have a 4 already for you to remove with it, or if you know they don't have a 4. Another way you can kind of deal with it is grabbing Empty Vessel off of your Ashwyn so that you stop them from being able to swing with the 4 into it. And if you have the will for it, you can also Girls Staring At in response to the block, and then your Ashwyn will get to kill it. If I know I'm going second against 0, I side in Hellfires, because this not only outs 4, it also outs the bird if they have the addition out with it, because the addition gives it barrier. So this can easily just wipe most of their good resonators. Now going second against 0 becomes a little different. Your objective now just becomes keep them off of the apple, don't let them get to the subruler. One way you can keep them off of the subruler is Empty Vessel, prevents them from playing Regalia for the turn, so this keeps them off of it for a turn. Even better than Empty Vessel is Bloodfire in response to them casting the apple, because this will actually prevent it from resolving. It works a little bit weird. It basically like fails to resolve by rules process and then just goes to grave. So I like having Bloodfire if I know the 0 player is going second. Going first against 0, I would still side in Hellfires, but I would also side in my Spirits just so I can pop the Regalia. I also side a 1 of Hide. This is a pretty decent option because 0 tends to have quite a few activate abilities. The apple has its activate ability to try and pop something and draw. Also something like a Tinkerbell you can stop with Hide. Hide is also good because if in response to an attack they try and flash something in, like a 4, you can Hide, put a counter on your Resonator and their 4, play Hide, recover your Ashwyn, tap down their 4, the attack goes through, and then swing again, and that puts on a lot of damage. So that gives you access to a really strong late game push, and it prevents them from just killing your Ashwyn. So against 0, you really just gotta watch out for 4s, try and just out-tempo them with Ashwyns, and keep their board clear. Against Rucheel, it's kind of a weird matchup because you are also removing cards from the top of their deck, so they are getting to depths a lot faster, but they're also decking out a lot faster. If you can keep them off you for a bit, they will deck out really fast, but they will also be getting to depths fast, so you need to be ready to stop those cards. Rucheel basically has 2 different ways that you can play her, either with the token spam stuff, or you can play Shitalkin and the sea monsters, which is the version that cares more about depths. Against token spam, Alabaster stops them from cheating in their tokens or cheating in the fishing spot, and Uppercut, after they have a bunch of tokens, can, once it hits 1, wipes all of them since they all have the sea monster race. Usually in the sea monster version, they're going to try and go in for one big push with a bunch of sea monsters that they get off of Rucheel Judgment, or they play Skip Dis and try and skip your turn so that they can OTK you. You can just Bloodfire wipe their board, or Tinkerbell wipe their board if you have a 2-cost. Or Empty Vessel in response to them going to combat to stop the attacks for a turn, and then going into their next turn, just deck them out. Since they're taxing your attacks, there's not too much reason to go for big pushes with Ashwyn and like Burning Flame. That's usually just going to get stopped and then you're going to get punished for tapping out into going aggro. So the aggro plays are probably not going to be super great in this matchup. You can side out your Burning Flames for either copies of Hellfire against the Sea Monster version to wipe Shitalkin, or you can side in the extra copies of Alabaster and Uppercut to stop tokens. Bloodfire is good against both versions. Against the token version, it stops all of their sunken depths, and then against the Sea Monster version, it just wipes everything, including Shitalkins and Skibdises and things that are normally annoying to out. Basically, you just need to keep their board clear, stop them when they go for a big push, and then more than likely you will deck them out. Moonglow can be a slightly tough matchup. Moonglow only mildly cares about the graveyard with stuff like Echo or Outdoor Hall. Stuff like Adalbert is also best hit by things like Mirror, which Gill Giotto doesn't get access to. This is a matchup where getting to your Lunar Jester is actually going to be pretty important because Lunar Jester limits their toolbox a lot. You can just go through their deck and remove out a lot of the options that they would be grabbing off of Adalbert. Since Moonglow also likes to get a ton of value from just looping Adalberts, if you can get your Regalia up and then High Speed Uppercut and Adalbert before they even get it set up and just expel all their Adalberts, that will put you in a really good position. Just keep in mind once they have one face down already, it won't be affected by this. Moonglow doesn't have a ton of ways to deal with Multi-Strike Bane, especially really early in the game. You do have to watch out for if the Moonglow player uses a Lunar Lake or Fire Lake against Ashwyn's Enter. Since Moonglow is playing a lot of free stuff from the standby area, Bloodfire Battlefield stops all of that, so getting a Bloodfire Battlefield up before going for an aggressive push is really good. Also, because a lot of Moonglow decks are splashing blue so they can play mirrors, this stops those. Moonglow also has some pretty good removal, so having Rumsfeld to protect your board is pretty nice. This also lets you gain Eternal before blocking an Adalbert so that you can take the whole multi-strike Bane hit without dying. And of course, if they're playing a Nighttime Raiders build, Shaman is going to be good. If not, you can probably get away with siding it out. Out of the side deck, Hellfire is a way to out Adalbert. Uppercut I already talked about, and then the 4th copy of Bloodfire I would also side in, which I also already talked about. And if you're trying to go the aggro route, Hyde is, as I mentioned with Zero, can do the same thing here, just recover, tap their things down, swing again with everything to go for one big push. Books are a bit of a tricky matchup for Gill Giotto. Alabaster Shaman is going to be your best friend in this matchup. This stops them from cheating in all their stuff off of their Ruler's Judgment. Similarly, Necro Barrier can stop the enter of their J Rulers. Girl Staring at 2, but it's a little more expensive. Books also tend to get a pretty wide board, but they do have Eternal on some of their stuff, so Girl Staring at before recovery into a Tinkerbell line is pretty nice for just wiping all that stuff if you can get it to resolve. And then since books also like to take a second to set up, this could be another case where going the aggro route could be worth it. Against books, it's really a battle of trying to keep the tempo on your side by stopping their cheat-ins, and then finding a moment to push in with Ashwyn or with your Judgment. So that's all the matchups I have time to cover. There's a lot more other matchups. There's a lot of other nuance. This hopefully is a good overview. I'm going to have the Force Wind deck list for this in the description, and in that deck list there's a section that has all of the other options for cards you can run that I mentioned, along with all of the cards that I mentioned that are counters to this deck. If there's anything else that I'm missing, let me know in the comments, and I will highlight your comment and make sure that that is known. So thank you so much for watching. See you in the next one.